The first thing I remember was the screeching of tires, the impact that threw my body like a rag doll, and the sudden, searing pain that coursed through every fiber of me. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and I felt the cold sting of blood trickling down my temple. Somewhere between shock and fear, I realized I was alive, but barely. The sterile smell of antiseptic replaced the scent of burning rubber, and bright fluorescent lights stabbed at my eyes. Nurses and doctors moved around me, like I was both invisible and urgent, asking questions I couldn't fully answer. My body refused to cooperate, trembling under the weight of pain and panic. Then the phone rang. I heard a nurse whisper, "We need to call her next of kin for consent." My heart sank as the word, "mother," left their lips. I wanted to scream, to tell them not to bother. But I didn't have the strength to form words. I had imagined my mother rushing to my side, concern etched into her face, hands hovering over mine in comfort. That had been the story I told myself for years, until reality hit like a second crash. Her voice on the other end of the line was casual, almost bored. "Tell her to stop seeking attention," she said. Just like that, she reduced my existence, my pain, my fear, my very survival, to a petty act of theatrics. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was raw, my lips trembling, but no sound came out. I wanted to cry, but the tears seemed trapped behind some invisible wall. All I could do was stare at the ceiling, the hum of machines filling the hollow silence around me. And yet, beneath the shock and fear, a seed of clarity took root. It wasn't that I was weak, it was that she had never cared. That was the truth, cold and sharp, slicing through any lingering illusions. My mother had never been a mother in the ways that mattered. She had been a presence defined by judgment, criticism, and cruelty. As I drifted into a restless sleep, pain radiating through my body in waves, memories of my childhood floated unbidden to the surface. Nights when I had cried silently in my room because she dismissed my struggles. Birthdays when her attention was never for me, but for the image I projected, or the way others saw her family. Years of words meant to wound, meant to control, meant to remind me that I was never enough. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, broken and helpless in a hospital bed, and still, she couldn't offer empathy. She couldn't even say my name without a sting of judgment. And yet, despite everything, a small, stubborn ember of anger glimmered inside me. Anger that was not just at the accident or the pain in my body, but at the way she had shaped me to accept neglect, to swallow my voice, to stay silent when I deserved to be heard. In that room, surrounded by machines and strangers, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. I could not rely on her. Never again. And though I didn't know how or when, I knew I would find a way to take back the power she had stripped from me. For now, though I let myself rest, even as the echoes of her words lingered in the sterile air, the seed had been planted. A reckoning was coming. I didn't yet know what form it would take, but I knew it would be sweet. And for the first time in years, I let myself imagine a life where her voice no longer held sway over me. I woke up to the insistent vibration of my phone, the small device lighting up with a number I didn't recognize at first. My head throbbed, my body ached, but the barrage of notifications was impossible to ignore. 47 missed calls. 47. And one voicemail that made my stomach twist with nausea. "We need your signature to save the house." The words echoed in my mind, not just as a mundane request, but as an extension of every selfish act my mother had ever committed. I pressed the play button again, needing to hear it one more time, to make sure my ears hadn't deceived me. It wasn't a mistake. She had tried to manipulate me while I was still recovering. Still fragile from the car accident that nearly killed me. A mix of anger, disbelief, and betrayal surged through me. All those nights I had spent hoping, wishing for her care, flashed before me like a cruel slideshow. I remembered every time I had been dismissed, every time my pain had been labeled as attention, seeking, every time I had internalized the message that my needs didn't matter. And now, after I had nearly lost my life, she called to demand a signature to save a house, as if the family home was more important than my survival. I didn't call back. I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked the number. Not because I was giving up, but because I needed to breathe, to think, to untangle the mess of emotions clawing at my chest. The act of blocking her felt like the first step toward reclaiming control, an assertion that I would no longer be her puppet, her source of validation, or her victim. Hours later, lying in bed, I replayed the voicemail again and again. Her tone, sharp and impatient, revealed nothing of the maternal instinct I had been longing for. It was all calculation. She had expected me to react immediately, to jump at her request without thought, and perhaps she had been counting on my weakened state to force compliance. But I wasn't that person anymore. Or at least, I didn't want to be. I was tired of being manipulated, tired of being treated like I was expendable until it suited her. Every missed call, every recorded word of her self-serving message, became a symbol of all the times I had been dismissed, disregarded, or undermined. I allowed myself a moment of quiet anger, letting it simmer and fuel a new clarity. Revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about taking back what she had stolen from me over the years: my voice, my dignity, my peace. And if saving the house meant exposing her manipulations, so be it. I remembered the legal notices I had glimpsed at the hospital. The stacks of documents tucked away in folders she thought I didn't notice. I remembered overhearing her boast about using the house as leverage over me, as if property could dictate love or loyalty. Every detail fed the fire building inside me, a careful, patient kind of anger that whispered, "She will not win. Not this time." By the time night fell, I had made a quiet decision. I wouldn't answer. I wouldn't plead, and I wouldn't beg. Instead, I would prepare. I would learn what I needed to know to protect myself, and to ensure she could never manipulate me again. The house, the money, the threats. They were nothing compared to the power I had yet to claim. And as I finally closed my eyes, body exhausted but mind alert, I allowed a small, almost wicked smile to touch my lips. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Betrayal had cut deep, yes, but it had also lit a path forward. Somehow I would make her regret ever underestimating me. And this time, the revenge would be mine to savor. The days that followed were a strange mix of pain and determination. My body was still battered from the accident. Bruised, bandaged, stiff, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. The voicemail, the missed calls, my mother's cold, calculating words, they had awakened something in me. Something fierce. Something that refused to be dismissed ever again. I started quietly, almost imperceptibly, gathering information. Legal documents I had ignored before, bills I had signed in ignorance, property records I had never fully understood. They all became pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. I spent hours on the phone with lawyers and financial advisors, pretending to be cautious, feigning hesitation, all while mapping out a strategy that would ensure I was no longer a pawn in her games. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but it wasn't reckless. I refused to act impulsively. Revenge, I realized, was far sweeter when it was planned, precise, and inevitable. I didn't want her to just lose control. I wanted her to feel the consequences of every time she had belittled me, ignored me, or treated me like I was disposable. I also found unexpected allies. Friends who had watched my struggles from a distance, colleagues who had quietly supported me, even professionals who had seen my mother's manipulations before. They all became part of the network I built. I had spent years believing I had to face everything alone, but now I understood the value of strategy, of using knowledge as power, of building support around me. but the emotional work was the hardest. I had to confront not just my mother's betrayal, but the patterns in my own life that had allowed her to hurt me so deeply. Late at night, I wrote in a journal, forcing myself to name the ways she had wronged me, the moments I had internalized shame, the times I had stayed silent when I should have spoken. Each entry was painful, but each was also a step toward freedom. Every truth I faced became fuel for the plan I was quietly assembling. By the second week, I had a blueprint. I would secure my position with the house legally, making sure no manipulations or empty threats could touch me. I would document everything, emails, texts, voicemails, so that if she tried to challenge me, the evidence would speak louder than words. And most importantly, I would do it in a way that allowed me to remain calm, composed, untouchable. I imagined the moment of revelation, her shock when she realized I had taken control, when she could no longer manipulate me with fear or guilt. I imagined the satisfaction of knowing I had planned it all, every detail, every move, with patience and precision. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice. And it was beautiful in its inevitability. Still, I allowed myself quiet reflection. The desire for revenge did not mean I had forgotten the pain. It meant I had transformed it. Each act of planning, each phone call, each legal consultation, was a reclamation of my agency. My anger became a tool, not a burden. My trauma became motivation, not a cage. By the end of that week, I felt a strange sense of peace. The initial panic and betrayal had evolved into control and clarity. I was no longer a victim lying in a hospital bed, helpless and dismissed. I was an architect of my own destiny, a strategist ready to reclaim what was mine, and a person finally learning the thrill of standing up, not just for survival, but for justice. And as I prepared the final pieces of my plan, I felt a quiet thrill in my chest. The reckoning was coming, but it wouldn't be rash, it wouldn't be messy. It would be inevitable. She had underestimated me, as she always had, and that was her greatest mistake. This time, I would not just survive. This time, I would win. The morning sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor, but it did nothing to soften the resolve in me. Today was the day. Weeks of careful planning, meticulous preparation, and quiet observation had led to this moment. The house, once a symbol of my mother's control over me, was about to become the instrument of my liberation. I had everything in place. Legal documents signed, evidence compiled, financial accounts secured. Even her lawyer, who had always assumed she had me under her thumb, was blindsided when I calmly presented the facts. Clear proof of her attempts to manipulate me during my recovery, undeniable documentation of her overreach, and legal authority that no one could contest. I could almost hear her voice in my head, sharp and dismissive, as I walked into the office where the final signatures would be witnessed. But this time, it didn't intimidate me. I was no longer the girl in the hospital bed, trembling at her words. I was someone who had transformed betrayal into strategy, anger into precision, fear into power. When she arrived, it was as if she expected me to crumble, to beg, to fold beneath the weight of her presence. Instead, I met her eyes with a calm that was almost unnerving. "I've taken care of everything?" I said, my voice steady. "The house, the accounts, you no longer have access. And legally, you have no claim." Her expression faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before she tried to mask it with indignation. "You can't do this," she snapped, though there was a tremor in her tone that betrayed her shock. "This is family. You don't understand what you're doing." I smiled, faint and controlled. "I understand perfectly. I understand that family is supposed to support and protect each other, not exploit and manipulate. I understand that respect and care are earned, not demanded. And I understand that I am done letting you control my life." For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes darting between the documents and me, realizing the reality she could no longer escape. Her power, once absolute in my world, had crumbled beneath my careful planning. She had underestimated me, as she always had. And in that silence, I felt something profound relief. Not just satisfaction, not just victory, but the liberation that comes from reclaiming yourself from someone who has spent a lifetime denying your worth. The house, the legal battles, the money, they were all symbols. The real triumph was in knowing I would never again be silenced, dismissed, or belittled by her. As she left, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, I allowed myself a small exhale, a quiet celebration of my own resilience. The sweet revenge wasn't in her anger. It was in my peace, my empowerment, my refusal to let her define my life any longer. I had taken back everything that mattered: my voice, my autonomy, my dignity. Later that evening, I sat on the porch of the house that was now unequivocally mine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. I reflected on the journey, from the hospital bed, where betrayal had cut the deepest, to the moment of quiet triumph, where I had claimed my power. Pain had been my teacher, anger my ally, and patience my weapon. The lessons I had learned were clear: love is not obligation, attention is not weakness, and strength often comes quietly. In the moments when no one is watching, I had faced the deepest betrayal of my life and emerged not broken, but whole. And though part of me still felt the ache of all those years of neglect, that ache no longer controlled me. It had been transformed into something else: clarity, resilience, and the undeniable knowledge that I would never let anyone diminish me again. The house was mine. My life was mine. And in the stillness of that evening, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The sweet justice of standing up for myself, of honoring my worth, was more satisfying than anything I had imagined. I had survived betrayal, and in doing so, I had finally found myself.